Now will we see the magic?
All right, where's Murray? Okay, who is it?
This is Jesus, kid.
Know then that it is the year 10,191.
Yes, we are bored. We're all bored now.
Hi, good night.
Good night.
Hello, and welcome to Mary vs. the Movies with your host, Mary Jones.
And Dennis Ling.
And this week, we are watching, I guess, would you call this a concert film?
No.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. The movie we're going to watch is something I don't really know anything about, but I know that Dennis really enjoyed it when he saw it.
It's a bit of a podcast.
Oh, my God. Podcast the movie?
Yeah.
Well, that's appropriate because we're coming up on our 2-year anniversary.
And we'll be doing a movie, as I wrote about in the newsletter.
Indeed. But in this case, what we were going to watch is Spaulding Gray's Swimming to Cambodia, which, as far as I'm aware, is a hour and a half monologue about, I assume, swimming to Cambodia, which I don't know what that entails. It's the 80s. Cambodia had been taken over by the Khmer Rouge at that point, or I'm not sure when that fell apart. But
do you want me to tell you anything about it?
Look, I know that it's him talking. I know it's directed by Jonathan Demme, which excites me because Stop Making Sense is my favorite concert film of all time.
Yeah.
And I know that the music is by Laurie Anderson. Now, that's everything I know. So that tells me this is a very, downtown New York art scene type of...
And you found that out from Liz Bott.
Yes, from the wonderful DJ Liz Bott from WPRB out of Princeton, New Jersey.
And you know her sensibilities, and she's a fan of the film, so you can probably guess.
Oh, no.
A little bit.
Look, I think Liz Bott and I have very similar sensibilities, and she is not just a fan of our show, but a Patreon, or a patron, or however you want to say it. So I've given you basically everything I know about Swimming to Cambodia.
Have you seen any spoken word stuff? Or
I mean, I remember slam poetry from the 90s.
Didn't you and I go to see Henry Rollins?
We did.
That was fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now you're bringing up an interesting thing. Where the line is between spoken word and somebody just standing in front of an audience and talking for an hour, and stand-up comedy, performance in general. This is an entire genre. The whole idea of standing in front of an audience and just talking for an hour, hour and a half. I'm not saying it was invented by Mark Twain, but I think the way that it is done in the United States maybe was... Look, giving a lecture tour was an old idea. Obviously, Charles Dickens famously went on tour in the United States, and Oscar Wilde did.
We've seen him.
Well,
a small version of him.
We saw an animatronic of him at what is now Macy's, was the Wanamaker's building.
Yeah.
In Philadelphia.
Marley was dead.
Yes, and I do love going to see the Dickens Village.
We try
Christmas.
to see almost every year. It's great.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. It's from the 1950s. I think it was originally at the Lit Brothers department store, but now the only department store left in Center City is Macy's, which was the old Wanamaker's, and long may it rain. But the idea of standing in front of an audience and telling a sometimes humorous story, maybe not always humorous, but just giving a speech in that sort of way, storytelling. It's not a new idea, but I think Mark Twain kind of pioneered it for the United States.
So stand-up comics, is that like a 20s on type of thing?
Well, vaudeville. That's actually, oh boy, if any of our listeners have not read Cliff Nesteroff's book, The Comedians.
Oh, that's right. I have to read that.
Oh, yeah, you do. It's great. But go and read that book. That will give you a crash course on stand-up comedy in America and comedy in general.
Actually, what fascinated me about early films is that there was usually someone reading or reading descriptions of what the film was sometimes.
Oh, you're going back into the silent era. Yeah.
Nickelodeons and that kind of thing, which is... It's and it, I think there's a lot of talking back to the screen and
Oh, because it's not like you're going to miss the dialogue.
Yeah.
So the whole interactive element of going into a theater and watching somebody speak at you, or in the case of silent films, act at you. I mean, it's old. Certainly in America, this is sort of foundational for how we, engage with entertainment. And the whole, you sit hermetically sealed in your little room watching a video on YouTube and not reacting is not natural. So having said that, I have no idea like if any audience response is going to come forward in this. Knowing that Jonathan Demme was the director makes me interested, because one of the things I love in Stop Making Sense is that is a movie which builds, right?
Yeah.
So that you start with just David Byrne backstage, and then, as the film goes on, you add all of the other band members and then all of the auxiliary band, then it just kind of stretches out through the entire performance to the point where the last couple of songs, they have the house lights up. You can see the audience. You can see how people are reacting to the music, so that the whole point of Stop Making Sense is that it's an ever expanding experience, so that the audience is then taken in, and then you as the film going audience are then taken into the experience of watching this concert film. Now, so this is around the same time period as when he made Stop Making Sense.
So
now
he's on a roll.
He's on a roll.
He's filming the feelies.
Yeah, that's true, because this is around the same time that he also makes Something Wild. So I'm kind of excited, mid-'80s. And what relationship does Spaulding Gray have to the New York art scene? I don't actually know, but I'm kind of assuming because of who he's working with. The fact that Laurie Anderson is coming in and doing the music for it. Now I know
Didn't she do some for Something Wild too?
She did.
Yeah.
I think. Now, did she work with John Cale on
I think
music?
so, yeah.
I believe. Yeah. Okay. So again, this is all that sort of downtown Lower Manhattan scene that I dreamed of when I was a kid. I'm dead serious. I dreamed of running away to when I'm like 11 years old, and the scene is already probably gone by then because it's like 1990. But, somehow I got exposed to it as a child, and I thought this is the thing for me. So the fact that I've never seen Swimming to Cambodia is perhaps kind of strange. Because it's not like I ever avoided spoken word pieces. Again, I came of age in like the early 90s. So the whole idea of slam poetry and spoken word, like that was the bread and butter of, avant-garde, performance. This was sort of the thing that you're supposed to aspire to. I mean, hell, Mike Myers is making jokes about it, and So I Married an Axe Murderer. So, like, this was kind of the thing. So the fact that I never saw this movie is more just an accidental oversight than any sort of avoidance.
I think it's more that because it was in the 80s, it kind of got left behind.
Okay.
I remember it kind of being talked about for a while, and then it just kind of disappeared.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I certainly heard of it.
I saw it on Prism, once again, Prism, the local cable channel in the Philadelphia area. And, I kept seeing these weird things on Prism like that, and Hal Hartley films, and just...
Well, Dennis, when I was
fun.
10 years old, I watched Prism, and I turned it on, and I watched, like, the David Frost Nixon interviews. So, look, Prism was an odd duck.
It was an odd duck. And we only had it just so we could watch Flyers games.
Right.
But
that's all it was for.
yeah,
and yet
Coates's Corner, and
an entire cable channel that existed just for the Flyers, and then they would throw in a whole bunch of like arts programming and sleaze movies. I don't get it, but it was great, and I miss it.
Because it had a lot of stuff that was on HBO, but the cool kids had HBO. And
well, the people whose parents had money had HBO, and the rest, everybody else had Prism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've kind of said everything that I think I can say about.
Is there a love triangle?
No.
Is there a cop chase?
No.
Is there swimming?
Maybe. I don't know. I assume this all takes place on stage.
Do you think there's acting, like special effects or something like that?
My impression is that it's fairly stripped down, but I don't know why I think that. Like, again, I don't think I've seen any of this, but
Okay.
I don't know for sure. But my impression is that it is just a guy on a stage and a stool. So, shall we go watch the movie?
Yeah.
had a very strange moment when this started. Not the first minute or so where we've watched Spaulding Gray go to the theater, but when he sits down and starts giving his monologue, and I said, oh my God, this is the best version of every Fringe show I ever went to. And I suddenly realized, oh, this is what everyone's been trying to do.
Yeah.
So I never saw this, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be covering it, but I came of age in the 90s and started doing theater at the turn of the century, college, and as soon as I got out of college. And this style of performance was everywhere, but it was not as well done as it is here. Although I will say I have a lot of fondness for Henry Rollins's spoken word, Jello Biafra. I think it's a hard art form to pull off successfully if it's not purely a comedian on stage telling jokes for an hour. Now, there are comedians who tell jokes for an hour, and it's not just jokes. They're trying to get at something actually raw and interesting. And it is closer to what Spaulding Gray is doing here in that sense. So that if you watch like one of Mark Maron's specials, or I like Patton Oswalt a lot. I think he's usually trying to get at something that's not just jokes, but is trying to go for something a little bit more interesting and deeper. Like those are two comedians who come to mind. And
even John Hodgman, his stand-up, quote unquote, approaches this.
Yeah, I
but doesn't
agree.
cross over.
No.
And it's weird where that line is.
And it's funny because on the one hand, I happen to like David Sedaris as a humorist, and I've listened to, he has a BBC show, which is basically him just doing these humorous monologues, kind of along these lines. And some of them can be more interesting than others. But there's something that's still, like, what Spaulding Gray is doing is a little bit deeper, because it's not a humorous monologue, although there are funny bits.
I feel like we're saying, here's all these humorists, and they're kind of doing something like Spaulding Gray, but it's as if we're saying, well, Spaulding Gray is doing art, and they're doing, popcorn or something.
Well, they're doing comedy.
Yeah.
Or they're doing humor.
But he's doing humor, too.
He is, but he's also
funny.
Well, he is, but he's trying to get at something a little deeper than that. It's an art form that's kind of hard to pull off, and a lot of people have tried to do it. And I mean, you see it I don't know if you see it anymore because I haven't been to a Fringe show in a while, but you used to see this all the time at the turn of the century, which is when I was, most involved in theater. And it is people who write a monologue about something that is intensely personal and is trying to, tap into this like revelation about something. And they try to make it maybe sometimes funny, but they try to make it profound with minimal direction. By which I mean there's minimal, physicality in a way.
Okay.
Okay, so look, the way that Gray tells this story is he's sitting at a desk the whole time on stage. He goes into a black box theater, and he sits down in front of everybody at a little desk, and it looks like a school kid's desk.
I think he called himself like a poetic newsman or something like that.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. And he just narrates it for an hour and a half, and he has a map, and then he points to things on the map. And there's not sometimes you would go into a show like this, and people would have like projections, and then they would be, there'd be slide projection, and they would, the next slide, and they'd use it in different ways. And here the most times that he does this, he uses a map, but that's because this is a film, and so he's able to pull scenes from The Killing Fields.
Yeah.
Now, that's a movie we're going to cover actually really soon, because I didn't make the connection. Going into this, I had no idea that Spaulding Gray was in The Killing Fields. I had no idea that would show up in this performance, and that it would be about that film. In fact, I never even put The Killing Fields on our list, even though I knew it existed. It's one of those movies that in the back of my mind sits there as depressing films of the 1980s about terrible things we did in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And, and that's exactly what it's about. When I was a kid in the late 80s, I went to a Catholic school in Philadelphia, and I remember for some unknown reason, they had us watch a movie about Vietnamese boat people coming to America. And I remember watching this film as a child. I was probably 9 or 10 years old, because if I was still living in Philadelphia. And I just remember being extremely depressed watching it and just being like, oh, the world's terrible. I knew the world was terrible, but here's another way to know that the world is terrible, by watching a movie. And so I slotted something like The Killing Fields, which I was dimly aware of. And I mean, the title alone tells you, oh, this is about terrible things. Yeah. So it's a movie that I've never sought out because, oh, wow, this is going to depress the hell out of me.
May still.
And it probably will. And that's fine. You know what? I'm an adult now and I can handle it. Or at least I hopefully will understand how to grapple with the ghosts of American foreign policy, a thing which, frankly, neither of us have any control over. It doesn't matter which party that we vote for. It's still going to be the same thing that happens. We're still going to have interventions. We're still going to have wars.
Well, at least can we have something fun next to it?
Well,
so we don't have 2 weeks of...
well, yeah, we are going to... Well, okay, next week we're going to watch My Dinner with Andre, and then after that we're going to watch Willow. But after that, we're going to watch The Killing Fields.
Okay. All right, Willow works.
Willow will be fun. Yeah. Or stupid, I don't know.
Actually, it's very depressing. It's about how this poor race is oppressed by...
I thought it was about, like... No, wait. I was going to say I thought it was about unicorns, but I think that's Legend.
Yeah.
Which is another movie on our list.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure Willow is
Unicorns and the devil.
I think Willow, isn't that like George Lucas's version of Lord of the Rings, but instead of a ring, he has a baby?
I don't remember any plot points. I just know I saw it.
Well, I did not see anything more than 5 minutes on cable as a child. So, but the point is, we're not talking about Willow. We're not talking about Vietnamese boat people. We're not even talking about The Killing Fields. We're talking about Spaulding Gray.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the thing is, it's not just that.
Because Jonathan Demme was a good filmmaker, he makes it visually interesting enough. Otherwise, you're just watching a concert film of a guy talking on a stage. And I've watched, I've watched plenty of comic versions of that. And people will do close-ups, or they'll know when to cut to a tight shot of the comedian and when to pull back and what certain punchlines will be. But this is a little bit more artful than that, right?
He's not making you an audience member, although he says that's what he's doing. We were just at Amber Theater, and they had this ad for you could see this play on the screen and stuff.
I guess it's like Fathom Events or whatever, where they'll show Broadway, but on your local screen and whatnot.
And it's multiple cameras, and there's close-ups, and there's distance shots, and distance shots look like you're sitting at a play looking at it, but then you're close, you're far. I have a feeling it's probably not as artful as this, though.
No, not at all.
Whereas this, there's camera tricks. There's times when he'll be zooming in on Spaulding, and then suddenly he'll zoom in on the sky background, and you feel as if you're going to be seeing a clip or something or whatever, but no, it's just this wall, and it pounds down back to Spaulding. He's following the rules, but he does all these tricks to make you feel like you're moving in different scenes. He even does the whole Smeagol Gollum trick from Lord of the Rings, where he turns his head and he changes the camera angle, turns his head and changes the other camera angle for two different characters that he's speaking for.
Oh, that's a really good pull. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it. But yeah, the way that Demme directs this is really, really interesting. Again, this is the guy who made Stop Making Sense, what I still think is one of the greatest concert films ever made, because there is something artful about the way that he lets that show unfold. And there is something extremely artful about the way he lets this film unfold. Demme is able to do a thing that is almost impossible, which is, so often you'll watch a concert film and it's fun, but there's always something a little bit lacking. When you are in the presence of an artist, you are in the room with if it is an actor or a play or a band, whatever, a performer. When you are in the same physical space as a performer, there is an energy. It is something ineffable. It is something that is very hard to put into, you can't make this scientific. Throw your science mind out. Don't try to quantify this. There is an energy that you experience when you are in the room with somebody. Even just the energy between you and me in here in this room right now. We are in a room in our house, and when we each had COVID, we didn't record. Why? Because the energy is different when you're online. Even if we're in different rooms of our house, when you're doing something and there's a screen mediating between you, there's a certain energy that's lost. Okay? And the same thing happens when you're making a concert film. There is a certain energy that's lost, and it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, and I've watched some great concert films. Like, Woodstock is amazing. Monterey Pop is amazing. The Summer Soul is amazing. And yet, it is not the same thing as being in the space with the artists as they're performing. Do you know how many times I've seen bands, and I've like just in a bar, and I've been like, this band is amazing. And I gotta get their CD. And then you go in and you buy their CD, and you go home and you listen to it, and it just doesn't have the same life.
We were at Beale Street in Memphis.
Yeah.
And just going to like the blues bars, and it's so cool. It's like it's just a really amazing experience. And I know if we had bought like a CD there, like we'd be like, this is the most boring music. Like
exactly, it would not translate in the same way. It is so hard to get down on record the energy that happens in a live performance. And even if you record the live performance, something is just missing. And the weird thing with this movie is Demme is actually able to capture something of a live performance. He is able to capture a certain energy and a moment that there is a certain intimacy. Because when you are watching a performer and you're in their physical space, there is an intimacy there. Demme is able to get that intimacy. And it's not just that he's using like camera angles and tricks and lighting and stuff. There's just something like, you mentioned yesterday something about like there's a certain sweatiness that Demme is able to capture in this. That
like a sweaty immediacy.
Yes.
Yeah.
That I don't think most people can get.
And like, so say you only watched like plays on a film or something and you weren't actually in the play. Like there are certain moments in a play where suddenly you feel it feels real or something, and he somehow captures that. And I feel like he was just on a roll at the time. So this was around the same time as Something Wild. How he captured Ray Liotta in that movie, there's like a menace there that you don't usually feel from a movie. Like you feel like, oh my god, this guy's gonna hurt me.
Yeah.
like when he first turns and looks at him, like it's like this shudder. He was just on some kind of roll where he was able to capture that. Because like, think of David Byrne. Like, when you think of David Byrne, you think this weirdo that he's always shy and strange and just talking weird, and you feel like no one can ever get him or something. And with Stop Making Sense, like, he's dancing and you feel like you're dancing with him. Like, you don't really feel separate from him. And like even like the whole big suit thing doesn't seem that weird when you're watching it in the movie. I mean, it's, you know, now, since then it's been kind of co-opted and it's on the cover. That's all you think of. But
I mean, hell, I've seen Kermit the Frog wearing the big suit.
Yeah.
Nothing against the Muppets. It's just sort of strange how it has permeated the culture.
Yeah. Well, it's quite an image.
And interestingly enough, Spaulding Gray, the last time we talked about him on this show, I don't know how much we even talked about him in that episode, is he shows up in David Byrne's only directed film, True Stories, where he plays a preacher for what's essentially like the Church of the Subgenius, done as a megachurch.
Yeah.
Which I found fascinating because, you know, the Church of the Subgenius is like an offshoot of the Discordians, and the Discordians are this kind of like a hippie beatnik joke about the Illuminati, and they're kind of unintentionally connected to the Kennedy assassination and like Carrie Thornley, and you get into a whole thing with like, this is everything that leads up to like QAnon, and like I don't even know if I want to get into the whole history of that, but you know, I can stand there with my cork board and red ribbon and just
So what you're saying is that that JFK and JFK Jr. are going to show up at this address.
Absolutely. They are still alive.
To anoint Donald Trump as king.
Yeah, the God Emperor of America.
I'd love to hear Bill Hicks' take on that.
Oh, God. I worry where Bill Hicks would have ended up, actually.
Yeah.
The origin of this particular monologue is Spaulding Gray has a role in the film The Killing Fields, where he plays an aide to the American ambassador. And, you know, the movie is about the fall. I don't even want to call it the fall because that always feels weird. American foreign oh boy, here's the thing. If I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about him making a movie in Thailand about he wasn't the one making the film, but he was acting in it, about American foreign policy and the Vietnam War, and boy, I mean, it's a mess, right? It's an absolute mess, because now you're getting into like the bombing of Cambodia, and were the CIA actually kind of covertly involved in supporting the Khmer Rouge in overthrowing the kingdom of Cambodia, because like it gets into all sorts of things where where the CIA kind of playing both sides, because the whole the Vietnam War is happening, and so we bomb Cambodia, but at this because you have these rebels, but you have these other weirdos who live up in the mountains, and
rednecks.
And Spaulding Gray describes them as rednecks who read a weird combination of Chairman Mao, but also like Rousseau, and once he said Rousseau, my brain went off like, oh no, that explains a lot, because Rousseau is all about like the
Noble savage.
The noble savage, exactly. And so that the Khmer Rouge year zero is essentially like, let's enact the noble savage, and the reason I'm going on like this in part is because his whole story is he's an actor, right. And he gets cast in this particular film because he talks to the English filmmaker.
Roland Jaffe?
Yeah, Roland Jaffe, who says, yeah, you'd be great for this. And he says, cool, I don't have any real like understanding of politics or foreign policy. Like this is like, I don't really know what happened in Cambodia or Vietnam or any of that. And he's like, yeah, you're perfect.
Yeah.
Part of this monologue is a rumination on how Americans will just pick up and go to a country and exploit it for their own pleasure, and not really grapple with the reality of how our presence there has been horrible and disruptive and all the rest of it. I realize I'm just talking and talking and talking, and here's the thing. This is a movie that is nothing but talking and talking and talking, and it can get elliptical, and he can kind of go off on these tangents, and he can go off and start talking. Like it's ostensibly about him going off to Thailand to help shoot a film.
It's a podcast.
Well, I've seen people call it a podcast, and I get it, because it is a man just talking. And I said at the beginning, it is very hard to just monologue to people for an hour and a half and pull it off. And there are people who can do it, and there are people who can't do it and be interesting. And this is one of those cases where you listen to them and they're interesting. And there are some people who can just kind of riff, right? I play off of you, right?
Okay.
And I think it's good that we can play off of each other, right? I don't know what I would sound like if it was just me ranting alone. Actually, I kind of worry that I do know what it would sound like. I don't know how many people would put up with that. There was an old tradition, especially with radio, of people who could just go on air and just talk. And you would take callers, but you would also just kind of monologue. Gene Shepard. I've listened to a lot of Gene Shepard, and everybody, when they think of Gene Shepard now, they just think of A Christmas Story. But he was a radio guy for decades, and he would just I think he was out of like WOR in New York. I have like a whole bunch of like his radio shows downloaded, and like probably like 20 years ago I used to listen to him on whatever early version of an iPod I had, and he could do that. He would just sit there and just like kind of talk and tell these stories, and it would just go, he would just talk. I mean, obviously, look, Tom Sharpling will sit there and talk for an hour, and yes, people will call in, and now there's a lot, but he could also just sit there and just talk for an hour and then go into a sound collage. There are certain people who can just do that, and if a person is interesting, I could sit and listen to them for an hour very easily, and this is an hour and a half, and I was never bored listening to this. In fact, I kept pausing it like every 30 seconds to write something down.
Yeah, I noticed.
And then, well, I know the 87-minute performance became like 2.5 hours because I kept pausing it and going and like turning to Dennis and going, "Oh my God, did he just mention Richard Nixon? Oh my God, did he just mention Guantanamo Bay? Oh my God, did he just
who was the guy? The Bo
Grits.
Bo
Oh
Grits.
my God. At one point he makes a joke about Bo Grits, and I just pause. I'm like, do you know who that is? And Dennis is like, no, because I'm normal. And I'm like, well, guess what? Your wife isn't, because I know who Bo Grits is.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
a lot of that.
To some extent, this is a monologue about he goes to make a film, but because he's in Thailand and Thailand just feels like paradise, he's trying to find like a perfect moment. And his whole thing is when you go traveling, you want to find a perfect moment at which point you kind of, your ego dissolves and then you're able to go back to the real world afterwards, right? And he's waiting for that perfect moment because he's been there for weeks and he's helping, he's shooting this film and he hasn't had this perfect moment yet. The thing is when you're a tourist, and especially if you go outside of, I don't know, what do you want to call it? The white world, the developed world? What's the best phrasing for that nowadays, right? Anything where you leave a certain confine where if you go to that country you kind of stay at your resort.
Where you leave the green zone and go to a smaller green zone.
Right. Yeah, kind of. Oh my God, that's kind of a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So that, like you have a cousin who spent his honeymoon in Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you say he spent his honeymoon in Mexico, where did he really go? Did he stay at the resort and just take excursions with a tour group maybe?
Oh.
Right, exactly. Because the idea is if you go beyond that,
we were in the wilds of Wales.
Well, I mean, we could have gotten bit by a werewolf.
That's true.
I mean, I saw American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
But no, there is this sort of thing where, especially if you're a white tourist and you go to another country and you kind of keep to the touristy areas and the resorts, because he has this whole thing in the monologue about, staying in this particular place that it is a resort and a hotel, but there's barbed wire. So there's always that element.
A pleasure prison, I think he called it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. A pleasure prison. And I knew what he was talking about because there is a sort of weird thing of, hey, let's all go to, we can go to Cancun, but you got to stay kind of at the resort. Yeah. So really, are you really experiencing Mexico? No. And it's the same sort of thing. You go to Thailand. Well, we're going to this resort, but are you really experiencing Thailand? No. And eventually he finishes with the shoot and he follows with these actors and they're continuing their shoot and he just kind of tags along a little bit and eventually has this transcendent moment where he goes out swimming and he's able to suddenly like sublimate his fears and whatnot and get past like a fear of drowning and all this type of stuff, which I tried to do off the coast of Jersey and did not work, but that's a whole other story.
So his advice, if you want to lose your fear, if you are plagued by fear, the best way to lose your fear is to, if you're afraid of drowning, what you should do is take all your money and put it on the beach somewhere, and then just go out and swim as far as you can to the point where it's dangerous and there are riptides and you could die, and the fear of losing the money will dissolve because you'll have a fear of losing your life. So.
Well, it also helps that apparently he was
It's like
smoking a lot of marijuana at the time.
Oh yeah, that too.
That also kind of helped.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting because he described that most of the time when he would smoke marijuana, he'd get very paranoid and have these terrible like reactions, which I've had.
And each time he's like, well, maybe not this time.
Yeah. I just had memories of us in the Grand Canyon freaking out and yeah.
Oh, he mentioned Philadelphia too.
Part of this whole thing is him just talking about travel in general. And he describes at one point taking a train across America at one point and getting in with a guy who is, I guess, in the Navy.
Jack Daniels.
He calls himself Jack Daniels, which definitely is not an alias. And he just, then this guy, it's funny, he starts talking about all of the, he's really into, like threesomes and whatnot. He gets picked up and he works out of Guantanamo Bay. And and this is one of those times where I stopped the movie. And I just looked at Dennis and said, did he say Guantanamo Bay? Because, of course, Guantanamo Bay has been an American base for, 150 years at this point, probably.
Yeah.
But it was a place that never meant anything to me until after the, War on Terror began. And I had this sudden, oh, my God, Guantanamo Bay. It's the American Gulag Archipelago. And it just sort of brought home for me, oh, that's right. Everything that I thought was a new sort of horror because of the Bush administration and onward, nothing was new.
Yeah.
Everything was old. There is this has been American foreign policy for in the time of Mark Twain, when Mark Twain would get angry and write about how what is Teddy Roosevelt doing? This is we're imperialists and this is not what the American way is supposed to be. And the reason I bring up Mark Twain, of course, is because he's the originator of what Spaulding Gray is doing, right?
Well, in America, yeah.
Well, in America, fine. But the humorous monologue of standing in front of an audience and just talking for an hour, hour and a half. Mark Twain was doing that in like 1898, and he was getting angry about what we were doing in the Philippines because how could you not when you actually research anything about it, and talking about how this is a complete betrayal, and whatever admiration he had for Teddy Roosevelt went away. And it is funny, then you jump ahead to the mid 80s and Spaulding Gray is doing this whole monologue about meeting this soldier, I guess sailor if he's in the Navy, and talking about how the guy was stationed in Guantanamo Bay, and the only reason we have Guantanamo Bay is because, of course, we had the war with the Kingdom of Spain, and we got Cuba, and then we got the Philippines, and like these things all tie together, right?
Yeah.
These things tie together, and it kind of, you step back, and if you start like again with the cork board and the ribbon, and you kind of go, oh my God, it's just been 150 years of American imperialism across the globe. Once we had our Civil War, we decided to branch out our imperium into the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this monologue is all about. Even though it's framed as I made a movie, it's actually about the American imperium. Mm-hmm. And it's extremely artfully done because he makes it about himself. But if you know what he's talking about, you realize, oh God, it is the year 2023 and we still have the same problems and we still have the same references. And it's giving me this moment of this was written almost 40 years ago. 40 years is a long time, right? Not on the grand scale of, human history, but 40 years is a long time. And realizing it could be another 40 years of the same, wherever it's convenient economically to bomb, we'll bomb, right? And if that means bombing Cambodia, Iraq.
It's not like before 150 years ago this wasn't going on.
It was going on.
It's just that it
but
wasn't us.
Yes.
It was the British. It was
the British. It was the
Dutch,
Belgians.
yeah.
It was the Germans. It's just that we're now it's our turn.
But like I feel like you're glossing over like the drugs and the sex part of it.
Well, yeah, I mean maybe
because that's at least half of what he talks about.
Well, okay, so that's really funny to me that you honed in on the sex and the drugs, and I'm thinking about the politics.
But I feel like it's tied together.
Though they are.
And that, he's a boomer.
Yeah.
And
we won't hold that against him.
I think we should.
Go on.
So Let
me tell you something. Like Gen Z and the millennials have their knives out for us. So
no, and like
they should.
You always hear about how like Gen X is boomers, and you're like no, we're not blah 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 blah.
No, they're the same.
In this case, exactly the same, because there's this desire to be the Beats.
Yeah.
And the Beats came out of World War II, and we didn't come out of that.
No, not even close.
This is definitely like Beat influenced.
One thing that he's talking about in this piece is, we go off to Thailand and make a movie, and while you're there, you take the drugs. Well, drugs are everywhere. But then he gets into kind of the sexual exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
My feelings on sex work are make it legal, put it all above board so that, you don't have, exploitation and whatnot. However...
Right, you should lessen it.
Well, less than the exploitation, yeah. Like I don't care. Like if this is what you want to do, that fine, whatever. And I don't think like work is work, and whatever my feelings are. I mean, look, I grew up in a very prudish Catholic household, so for me to even get to that point is it took a lot, but. There is something creepy about tourists who go to a place like Thailand and take advantage of people's poverty and use that as a way to get their rocks off, right?
Yeah.
Part of the monologue is about that. But it's couched within a way of... The way I read it was, yeah, you can go to Thailand and do all this stuff, but this is also related to the way that, the United States is relating to all these other Asian countries. It's just another way to exploit them.
Yeah.
And it's another way to use them. There's a moment where he says, yeah, there were always concubines, there's always been, prostitution in the world, but something changed when, the United States was in Vietnam, and now all of a sudden you are our shore leave. And this sort of created a whole new economy of it. The thing is, it's funny to try to talk about a monologue. No, it really is. Because, I'm just giving my impressions of a man talking. And I found it a really, like I said, I went and I re-listened to the whole thing today while I was working. I just put it on because it's not a particularly visual film. Although, again, I'm impressed with the way that Demme made it visually engaging.
So do you think it works as a film?
Yes. Not every film is an epic, right?
Right. I'm just saying, would you remember this film?
Oh, hell yeah.
I mean, the average person. Like you.
Yeah, well, what's an average person? Is an average person going to seek this out? Like, you're asking a question. Is a guy who just wants to watch The Fugitive on cable going to sit and watch somebody in Cambodia? No. They never were. They're not going to read Gravity's Rainbow either.
So, no, what I'm getting at is, well, for one thing,
I haven't read Gravity's Rainbow either, to be honest, although it's sitting on my shelf.
I wasn't looking to watch this movie when it was on Prism, and I caught it, and I couldn't look away. It's as soon as you start hearing him talk, you're stuck. It keeps hitting these moments where oh my god, that's the most important thing I ever heard. That's so important, oh, that's really incisive. I can't believe I heard that. And I feel like that when it's done, you forget all of it. It's kind of like a good comedy record. And you don't remember any of the jokes.
Well, I tell you, I took 5 pages of notes when I sat and listened to it today, even though I was supposed to be working. And I was working. But there was a moment that had to be written down.
Okay.
The director says to him, because part of what they're doing is they're enacting this genocide.
Yeah.
And the director says to him, that having seen all this, because, Spaulding is reacting to even the act, he has this whole thing about, some of these actors are going Stanislavski and they're trying to find their emotional memory and they're not doing it. And he's just look, I'm looking at these people laying on the ground covered in blood. And I'm that's enough for me. It reminds me, of course, of that, Laurence Olivier anecdote, saying to Dustin Hoffman, have you tried acting? But he's having this emotional reaction to everything going on around him because it's a little too real for him. And the director says to him, I hope you understand now that morality is not a movable feast. And Spaulding says, essentially, I don't know about that because I see it moving all around me.
That was a good line.
It's an amazing moment. It's an amazing line because it's this idea of, you say morality is not a movable feast, and yet I see people moving goalposts all the time. And what is considered moral and what is considered acceptable behavior. Do you know what a movable feast is?
No, I'm not sure.
A movable feast is there are certain dates in the Christian calendar that move around.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Christmas is always December 25th, but Easter moves.
Right.
There was hundreds of years of debate as to when to hold Easter, but you always knew when Christmas was.
Right.
Okay. So the idea is that morality has a foundation. It doesn't move. Well, guess what? That's not true, and that's not how humans really work. Yeah. And that's kind of what this monologue is about. It's the fact that morality does move and it does shift. And it's a house built on sand. Even though we pretend that it's not. Everything is built on sand. So that whether you're talking about morality or whether you're talking about, finding your poetic truth in order to act, or whether you're talking about the morality of when you're on vacation versus when you're back at home, when you're in Thailand versus when you're back in upstate New York or whatever. Crumville. When, your morality, we all like to think that we are these unchanging beings and we have this perfect self that is going to react the same way regardless of the situation that we're in. But in reality is we're blurry, right? Human beings are very blurry creatures. We're amoebas. We're not steel. So yeah, I didn't want to go point by point to everything he says in this film because that, first of all, that's a weird way to try to react to a concert film. And second, because this is not about plot. I don't know. It's about the experience of listening to him talk. There are things about it that are kind of fleeting. Like I said, I had to watch this twice to kind of catch everything that he's talking about. It kind of hit me watching it a second time. Like, for one thing, because it was the second time I watched it, I kind of knew some of the things that he was going to bring up, although I didn't know when he was bringing them up. And I think people have this, there's this weird impression that a lot of people have these days of, oh, they totally improv'd this whole thing. Like there is this tendency to watch, like, say, a comedy film, like, yeah, they were just riffing that whole time. They just kind of like made up the lines on the spot. And it's like, that's almost never true.
It's kind of like when people talk about songwriting and they say, oh, that must have happened to you.
Yeah. Like, there is a desire in our culture to want to believe that art is spontaneous. And that it just sort of happens and it comes to you and it just sort of evolves fully formed. It's like, that's never what happens. Things get written out. Dialogue gets written out. Like, yeah, there can be moments that are caught on screen or whatever that are, just a momentary improv or whatever. But very often things are actually really, like, they're written down. They're scripted. They're, and this was highly scripted. And you can, when you watch it a second time and a third time, I think you start to see where he's pulling certain threads and certain strands, and they actually do end up coming together at the end. And I get very frustrated when people will watch things nowadays and there's this desire to believe that everything was spontaneous and that things were just kind of thought up off the cuff. Because you know what it is? Because it's a denial that things actually take effort. There's a denial that things actually take work. And people don't want to believe that you actually have to workshop things and you actually have to put a lot of effort into writing and in filmmaking. And you know what? That the reality is things are hard to make. It is hard to make a movie. It is hard to write a monologue. It's hard to write a script. And it is hard to do comedy. And you don't just stand up in front of people and start riffing. Yeah, there are some people who probably can do that. But you know what? The reality is you actually have to sit and write this stuff out and you have to workshop things.
I think people don't like the idea that someone can manipulate them.
What? Well, but why is it manipulation?
Well, I mean, like, in terms of, like, say, Hitchcock, that's obvious.
Well, all art is manipulation.
Yeah.
Every relationship.
Don't attack me.
No. But see, this really bothers me because then you're essentially saying that every time you create a thing and you actually put effort into it, it's manipulation.
I think some people feel that way.
Well, you know what? Some people need therapy.
Like the Khmer Rouge or whatever.
What about the Khmer Rouge? Wait a minute, are you comparing making art to the Khmer Rouge?
No, I'm like how that whole, like, kill anyone that wears glasses, kill anyone that
Yeah. Kill all the intellectuals.
Yeah.
Kill anybody who put any effort into anything. Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
See, I'm tying it around.
You are tying it around. High five, man. You did it.
Like, I wanted to talk a little bit more about Jack Daniels.
Okay.
And the idea that, he's got his finger, he's like doing this coke while his finger's on the button for a nuclear device.
Yep.
In a ship in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
You think of these people and these, like sitting by these buttons and, his picture war games and they're in like Kansas or something, but
yeah,
he's just sitting in Philly.
At the Navy Yard.
Yeah.
Back when it was still a Navy Yard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine the end of the world happening because of some guy on cocaine in Philadelphia.
I wonder if the rocket was there or if it's like a remote thing. Or...
Well, I'll tell you something, honey. My mom's house is less than a mile from a site that used to house the Nike missiles.
Oh.
It is. My mom lives on a ridge
mm-hmm.
outside of Philadelphia. Okay, she lives on there's a ridge of hills, and if you go around the corner from her house, you're on a ridge and you can look down into the city.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a cool spot, right?
And there's horses.
And there's horses there. There's a horse farm there.
It's for sale if you want it.
Well, do you have several $1 million? Because I don't. As far as I know, the missiles are not there anymore. But it was very strange when we moved there, and realizing, oh. You could launch World War III less than a mile from my house. So that was Swimming to Cambodia, written and starring Spaulding Gray and directed by Jonathan Demme, with some film clips from the film The Killing Field. So, you see Sam Waterston at one point. And the music is by Laurie Anderson, which it's great. It's such good music. And it complements what he's doing so well that it is very much a part of the piece. It is not just background music. It is as much a part of the show as his speaking. It's Laurie Anderson. She's amazing. It's a great choice, and it's very atmospheric. So you can follow us on social media. We are Mary VS Movies on Twitter, Mary VS Movies at Instagram, Mary VS Movies at mas.to on Mastodon. We are Mary versus the Movies on Tumblr, and yes, someday we will have a website. We are also on Patreon, where you can help support the show. We're patreon.com/Mary VS Movies. Not only are you helping to support the show, but if you sign up and you donate $3 a month, you will get our secondary podcast, Hollywood Avalon, where we are looking at our theory in movies. The first episode is already out. It is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The second episode will be out soon. It is on the movie First Night, which is not a good film. Not even close. We're on all of the major platforms. We are on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review us, and we would really appreciate it if you would do that, because every time that you review a show, they climb up just a little bit higher in the algorithms and people can find them easier. And also, it just makes me feel really good when you say nice things about us, because we're all shallow, aren't we? Anyway, you can also find us on Stitcher and Spotify and Overcast and Google Play and whatever. You can go to Libsyn and get our RSS feed and plug it into whatever your podcatcher of choice is. Now, next week is a big deal, because it is going to be our 2-year anniversary.
How did you find that out?
Because I remember what day we started the podcast on.
What day was it?
March 18th, 2021.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. This is 2023?
That makes sense.
Yeah, March 18th. So, it will be our 2-year anniversary. Our 100th episode is still, going to happen sometime either late April or early May. But, I want to celebrate our 2-year anniversary by watching the most podcast of movies that has ever existed, My Dinner with Andre. I'm kind of excited. This is one of those movies that I kind of know that I should have already seen. I've seen references, I've seen parodies, I've seen all kinds, whatever. It's Wallace Shawn talking with some dude named Andre. I'm excited.
I think that guy's from Philly.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I forget what his last name is, and I don't know why he's important. I just know he's another artist. But I know who Wallace Shawn is.
Yeah.
Because
he's the great Vizzini.
Well, okay, he is Vizzini. He is the dinosaur in Toy Story. But he's a playwright, and he's an actor.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
The dinosaur, which one?
He's the T-Rex in Toy Story.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
He's also an accomplished and well-regarded playwright.
Yeah, but the dinosaur?
Yes, he's T-Rex.
With the little arms?
With the little arms, the green dinosaur.
Huh.
So next week we will be watching My Dinner with Andre.
Wow.
I'm excited.
Now I'm just going to picture the dinosaur.
The whole time. Yeah, well,
In Greenland.
Yep. So, until next time.
Sorry, sir, we've just run out of cluster.